Let's see. Okay. Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of 30 anchors in 30 days. Now, this training is pretty simple. The goal is to give you a platform for you to use your faith to bring transformation to the 11 most important life domains. Now, these 11 life domains are grouped into 3. Now, if you want to find out a bit more about these 11 life domains and the 3 classifications that they fall under, you can just check up the training that I've done on it. It's the 3 life relationships. If you're watching this on Instagram, you can just click on my bio, just click on it. The training is free. Anywhere else, whether Facebook, YouTube, on my website, you can just find the link right under this video where you can go ahead and watch that training. This morning, we're going to continue on our conversation along the lines of the first life domain, and that is your relationship with God. Today, we're going to add another foundational truth that would help your faith in this particular relationship. And the foundational truth is pretty simple. It's this: God is consistent, but God is not predictable. I repeat, God is consistent, but God is not predictable. Now, what does this mean? Simply put, God is consistent in his character or his nature, but he is not predictable in his methodology. I repeat, God is consistent in his character or his nature, but he is not predictable in his methodology. Now, this is one of the things that gets us all twisted in the knicker. Because why? The way we look at God, we assume that because we have been told that God is consistent in his nature and his character, automatically that means his methodology has to be consistent. Now, the Bible says something in Malachi chapter 3, verse 6. It says, I am the Lord, I do not change. And because of that, you descendants of Jacob are not destroyed. And that gives us the clear foundation to understand that God is consistent. But in terms of his unpredictability, if we go down to Isaiah chapter 55, verse 9, it says, for as high as the heavens are above the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. And this is the thing that introduces unpredictability in the way in which God reflects his nature. Meaning that God's character remains the same, but how he shows it. So, for example, we hear that God is love, God is patient, God is kind. But the assumption for most of us is that the way God is going to display this is going to be predictable. There's going to be a clear path in terms of how he shows these character traits every single time. Ding, 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 ding. That is unfortunately wrong. And because of this, some of us have actually developed what I would call the theology of the schizophrenia of God. I repeat, some of us have developed what you call the theology of the schizophrenia of God, meaning that God has multiple personality. So there was the personality that God had before Jesus was born, and there's the personality that God has after Jesus was born. So, for example, one of the popular ones people say is that God before Jesus Christ was born was not patient. You do something wrong and you get hit with judgment as quickly as possible. Whereas when Jesus Christ came, God became a lot more patient. I'm sorry, there's nothing that could be very far from that truth. So don't just take my word for it. We're going to do a little bit of maths problem this morning. One of the famous examples that people use to explain why God is not patient is the Canaanites. The way in which God gave the people of Israel sort of like a wipeout protocol to take out the whole nation, the whole Canaanites that existed in the land of Canaan. So we're going to use that to explain the fact that God has been patient. Whether it was during that time or in these times, God still remains patient. So in Genesis chapter 15, God shows up to Abraham and tells Abraham that, look, because the Canaanites were big, bad, and sinful, I am going to wipe them out of this land and I'm going to give you land to your children. We go down to Genesis chapter 16 and Abraham decides to have Ishmael. We know Ishmael is about 13 years older than Isaac. And then let's follow through the story of Isaac. We know that Isaac lived about 60 years before he had Jacob and Esau. And then we also know that Jacob lived about 130 years before he went down to Canaan. Before he went down to Egypt. So if you do that math, 13 plus 60 plus 130, that's 203 years. We know the people of Israel spent 430 years in the land of Egypt. And we also know that the people of Israel spent about an extra 40 years wandering in the wilderness before they hit Canaan big and ready to take over the land. So 430 plus 40 years, that's about 470. So 470 plus 203 years, that's 673 years. Meaning that God gave the people of Canaan about 473 years, 673 years, to be big, bad, and sinful as much as they like. And during that period, the land was prosperous. The land was having all the goodies you can imagine. It was so prosperous that when the 12 spies went, it took 2 men to carry the bunch of grapes that they picked up from the land. But let me also add something to it. The children of Israel was not the only way that God had tried to get the attention of the Canaanites. The Philistines were also part of it. Yeah, you probably never knew that. Now in Amos chapter 9 verse 7, God writes, he says, "Are you Israelites more important to me than the Ethiopians? For I brought the people of Israel out of Egypt. I brought the Philistines out of Crete, and I led the Syrians from Kir." Now, this is telling you something, that the Philistines were not original inhabitants of the land of Canaan. God actually brought them from Crete to come and actually live. And if you read in Jeremiah actually referred to the Philistines as colonists, meaning that God brought the Philistines with the hope that, look, maybe these people, by way of their lifestyle, they would probably bring about a change to the Canaanites. Let me tell you a little bit of National Geographic information. I was reading an article, and I found out that National Geographic actually did an excavation of where the Philistines used to live. And as it turned out, based on their DNA dating, they actually found out that the Philistines come from modern day Greece, which equivalent to, and Crete, which aligns very much with the Bible account which we already have of them coming from Crete. But guess what? They said they started tracing, doing all the carbon dating and they were finding the original DNA sequencing that agreed with the fact that they came originally from Crete. But after a while, it started diluting. And what basically happened? The Philistines started getting married to the Canaanites, and so, as it were, it disrupted the flow of the genetics. That it was not the pure genetics that they came from Crete. But hey, that's another side of the story. But the point here is this: God actually had 2 methodologies which he was trying to use to shake the people of Canaanites. He had the people of Israel that he was going to use, which he didn't use them until about 673 years to use the wipeout protocol. And then he also had the Philistines, who he brought to act as colonists, who eventually, it looks like, they too got caught up with the whole lifestyle that the Canaanites were living. The point I'm making here is this: God is patient. Meaning that the patience level of God, you can imagine, God gave the Canaanites as much as 673 years before he issued the wipeout protocol that completely took them out. Now, what does this truth have to do for your faith? The goal of the understanding of this truth gives you confidence when you go through seasons where, as it were, God is not responding to you or displaying a particular character trait the way you expect. So, for example, you see somebody in which God did something for the person, maybe he got some good happy ending that you fall in love with, and you're like, oh God, how I wish you would do that for me to show that you love me. And God is like, look, I love you. The fact that I love you does not mean I have to do exactly the way that this person has experienced me. The bottom line here is this: God's character to you, in terms of him being a loving God, him being a father to you, remains consistent. How he decides to reflect it may not be the way in which you expect it. He is not predictable in that sense. But let the confidence that God is consistent, let it keep you strong and let it keep you firm during the periods where his display of that character is not predictable. It doesn't fall within the general lines of how people have explained that things should be done, how people believe that God is expected to behave. Once you can find within your heart to believe the nature of God, that this is how God is, let that be the firm foundation during that season of life. And I believe that, look, this particular truth is going to help to keep you constant and consistent through every season of life. So that, look, just like God is consistent in his character, you will be consistent in your response to God. That irrespective of whatever the seasons, whether it is God responding to you in the predictable way you expect or responding to you in the way that is not predictable, your own trust and your own faith and your own belief and confidence in him remains consistent. And that is the foundational truth we embrace today. Once again, I'm going to repeat it. God is consistent in his character or nature, but he is not predictable. in the way in which he expresses that. And I pray that this truth will give you a new light and a new life for your spiritual walk with God. Thank you very much for hanging out with me. I look forward to hanging out with you again tomorrow. Tomorrow again, it's going to be 6 a.m. West African time, Western European time. And again, if you want to find out more about the 11 life domains, which are grouped into 3 relationship groups, on Instagram, you can click on my bio, you find the link there. And anywhere else, you find the link under this video. I want to wish you guys a wonderful day. I pray that God himself will open new doors for you and give you the wisdom that you need to navigate the new doors that he's opening for you. Thank you very much.